Thank you for downloading from Digital Mindfulness. This is episode number 38. Welcome to the show. My guest today is Professor David Levy. David is a professor at the University of Washington Information School, where he focuses on the challenge of achieving contemplative balance and how individuals and society can live a healthy, reflective, and productive life. He's the author of 2 books on the subject, Mindful Tech, How to Bring Balance to Our Digital Lives, and also Scrolling Forward, Making Sense of Documents in the Digital Age. Since the beginning of his career at the famed Xerox PARC, and now at the University of Washington, David has focused on the challenge of maintaining a contemplative balance in an information-saturated culture. This is a fascinating interview, and I hope you enjoy this with David Levy. I've got other colleagues as well that are really interested in this, and so and I told them I was interviewing you, and actually, the book that you've just released, Mindful Tech, that's actually the result of many years. You say that it's 10 years, but I think it's more like 20 from the time you started at Xerox PARC.
Oh, it's even more than that, but it's 20 years since I wrote anything on this topic specifically. 21 years. I mentioned in the preface that the first thing I ever wrote was called "I'm Not Here Right Now to Take Your Call: Technology and the Politics of Absence," and I basically produced that in 1995. But it's been 10 years that I've been teaching the course. That is the more specific reference point for the book.
That's amazing. So, gosh. So you called I'm not here that the politics of absence. Did you even see that this would become like digital distraction and the need for people to balance their relationships with technology? Did you see that as being a topical issue even then in 1995?
Absolutely. I could really see it arising. I could see it happening in my own life, and I could see it happening around me. I mean, if you go back to that era, and I was starting to think about these issues in the early 90s, and then finally wrote something in 1995. But if you think back to that time, people already had cell phones. There was call waiting. There were answering machines. And the internet was becoming, in effect, a public utility. And people were starting to use email regularly. And so all of those things were clearly contributing to people's sense of, if you like, overload. I mean, today it seems almost laughable how little there was for people to complain about relative to where we are today. But that was when I began to realize that we were on a path that was presumably only going to accelerate.
And we talk of digital technologies, and I guess when we talk of digital distraction now, people kind of automatically assume that with social networking or with smartphones. But I think you're right. In 1995, a common discussion in my household was, Lawrence, stop watching TV and go outside, or get off the games console and go outside with your friends or whatever. So you're right. I was going to say that that's really prescient for you to write such an article even in 1995. But you're probably right. The first stirrings of kind of being addicted to digital devices, and also distraction, these were starting to become issues even then. Because I remember these discussions at home.
Well, not only that, but I mean, I'm glad you mentioned television, because the prior technology that opened up this whole debate about the healthy and unhealthy use of technology in our lifetime was television. So you have books like Amusing Ourselves to Death. I forget exactly when that was written, and you have gerrymanders. I always forget whether it's 4 arguments or 5 arguments for the elimination of television. And you get this very kind of back and forth, at times almost Luddite view that television is going to be the death of us, which of course is a terribly extreme position, but it shows that people were really worrying about how do we achieve balance with the increase in media. But the other thing I would say, Lawrence, about this is that, I mean, and this is not primarily the work that I do in mindful tech. It's in other of my writings. But my argument is that we have been on this path for at least 100 years, and that a lot of the acceleration and growing sense of overload comes out of our economic system, which is always driving to increase the rate of production and consumption. So it's been going on for a very long time. You can see people concerned about it 100 years ago. What has happened is that over these 100 years that we've continued to develop new technologies that have accelerated production and consumption. Basically, that it's been 100 years of people increasingly being concerned and expressing for their moment in history their sense of concern. But digital technologies, or even social media, are just the latest manifestations of something that's been going on for a very long time. And I find that to be a very helpful way to frame this. It means that we don't need to, in effect, demonize the technologies. The technologies can be used in many different ways, but insofar as their primary role is to do with acceleration, they will continue to get us into these challenging places where we're trying to figure out how to balance our lives.
That's really interesting because it's at once empowering because it brings all of the agency and power back into our hands, right? It's all about how we use the technology. But then I guess at the same time,
well, let me try to continue. I think you were on a very good line of conversation there. I mean, on one hand, it suggests that we do have the power, but it also suggests that there are very large social and political forces at work that make it hard for us to make changes. I mean, in fact, in my book Mindful Tech, I basically say, look, this book is primarily about how we can, as individuals, recover a greater sense of balance. But at the same time, I say it's not just up to us as individuals. There are social and political steps that we may want to and need to take, but that's not primarily what this book is about. And by the way, another reason that I think that that it's useful to have a sense of the longer sweep, this 100-year period, is that 100 years ago, it wasn't so obvious that there would be problems with a kind of more, faster, better acceleration of production and consumption. In fact, I think the engineers who largely conceived of this project, which was thinking of our economic system as a machine and then figuring out how to speed it up, that they actually thought that they were going to improve people's lives, and in some ways they really did. But now I think we're at a very good moment in history because things have become so fast and people are feeling so overloaded that we can see more clearly what people 100 years ago couldn't see. So we're in a better position to have exactly the kind of conversations that we're beginning to have about how do we achieve greater balance.
That is fascinating. And you know what I'd like to do now, because I would absolutely go off on this tangent, but I'd like to just bring it right the way back and just have you introduce yourself to the audience, because as you've mentioned before, you've written this wonderful book, Mindful Tech, but I'm wondering if you can just share a little bit more information about yourself and your journey to be focusing on digital overload and mindful technology.
Sure. Well, by training, I am a technologist. I did my PhD in computer science at Stanford in the 1970s with a specialization in artificial intelligence. And I went on to spend many years at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, which is the famed Silicon Valley think tank where the personal computer was invented and many of the technologies that we're still using every day were integrated. And then in the year 2000, 2001, I became a professor in the information school at the University of Washington in Seattle. So, in addition to those that work, I've also been a consultant in Silicon Valley. I've done consulting work out of Europe. So I have a lot of background as a technologist and originally as a computer scientist. But I also think of myself as a contemplative, as somebody. I'm a longtime meditator. I'm somebody who needs quiet time, really needs time to think and reflect in deeper ways. And you can see that thread of my life first in, actually, the place to see it first was that after I finished my PhD at Stanford, I moved to London to study calligraphy and bookbinding and actually have a degree in calligraphy and bookbinding. I felt it was important for me, having finished up a very sort of speedy, fast-paced, tech-centered life in Palo Alto and Stanford. I felt the need to explore other aspects of technology, if you like, and I was always interested in calligraphy and was very interested in how I could bring my mind and body together. I think of calligraphy as my first contemplative practice. So I spent a couple of years in London studying calligraphy and bookbinding, then moved back to the Palo Alto area to spend the next between 15 and 20 years at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center. But also during those years in the early 80s, took on a serious meditation or mindfulness practice that I've continued for many years. So I sometimes say that I've really lived in the fast lane or the fast world and the slow world, both. And for many years, I've been trying to figure out how to integrate the fast world of tech and our information-intensive lives with the slow world of meditation and contemplation. And that's really been a lot of the work that I've been trying to do over the last 20 years, is to figure out how to establish a more mindful relationship with my own digital devices and apps, and also how to figure out how I could help other people do that as well.
Fantastic. So what I'd like to do now is to really delve into this term mindful tech, because I absolutely love the phrase, but I was wondering if you can just tell us what, in your opinion, mindful tech actually is and why it's so important.
I think the way that I would explain the title mindful tech is to say that for a long time I've been interested in the intersection of two dimensions of human life that have been very important to me personally and that have become very important to us globally, probably. One is, of course, the place of technology in our lives. We know that digital technologies have come to infuse almost every aspect of our lives, for better, and in some cases as well for worse. And as technology has become more and more important to us and more integrated into almost everything, we've become aware of certain problems like distraction, like information overload, like a sense of continual busyness. And one of the ways potentially that we can approach these challenging aspects of the technology is to become more aware or more mindful of how we're using them and to begin to see the effects on us of using them in certain ways. Hence the idea that if we were able to be more mindful while we're using these technologies, we might actually figure out how to use them in healthier and more effective ways. So that's basically the idea behind the title, is what lies at the intersection of mindfulness and technology. And the answer, or an answer, is the one I provide in the book called Mindful Tech.
Would you say then, David, that as technology becomes more ubiquitous, that we're becoming more aware of the importance of attention, particularly human attention?
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. That the ubiquity, the omnipresence, the integration of technology into almost every aspect of our lives, makes us realize that these tools are tools that are actually intended to craft our attention, to direct our attention in certain ways. And that attention can be directed in helpful and effective, in healthy ways, or in unhelpful and unhealthy and ineffective ways. And so, on the one hand, it's a remarkable thing, Lawrence, that we're having this interview, this conversation right now. It's mediated by digital technologies, allowing you to be in London and me to be in Seattle, and to speak as if we're basically in the same room. That's a beautiful example about how we're able to throw our attention 6,000 miles in real time. On the other hand, the same ability to direct our attention in this way with these tools means that even as I'm talking, that I'm getting signals from email and other places telling me that other things want my attention as well. And if I'm not careful, if I'm not mindful about how I'm directing my attention, then I could, in the middle of this conversation, be distracted by something else that's coming along. So it's really the challenge we face, I think, is how to direct and use our attention wisely, how to make skillful decisions moment to moment about where our attention should be directed.
And again, kind of going back to what we were saying earlier, about basically people, we were talking about the television and how the same argument and discussion about the way that people relate to technology has been had over decades. You know, you say 100 years, and it seems that humans are constantly figuring out how to live with technology. As the technology develops, we have to figure out new ways to live with it. So I find that absolutely fascinating. But in the book, you've talked about some amazing concepts, which I was hoping you can tell us a little bit more about. For example, you talk of mindful unplugging, and I was wondering if this is similar to the kind of, I guess, more popular term like digital detoxing.
Yes. Basically, I mean, we can make a very strong link between what I call mindful unplugging and what people are calling digital detox. All I mean by that phrase, mindful unplugging, is making a decision to abstain from certain devices and apps for a period of time with the intention of specifically noticing what happens when we let go of those devices and apps. The phrase digital detox is not a phrase that I use. It carries a slightly different implication, which is, I mean, detox suggests that we are specifically and necessarily addicted to our devices and apps. I don't, especially when I work with students in the course that I teach around this subject, I don't make any assumptions I don't make any assumptions for the students about whether they're addicted or not. In fact, I do bring in a friend and colleague, a woman named Hilary Cash, who runs an internet addiction center in the Seattle area, to talk about the question of addiction. But I'm very cautious about the use of a term like that, just because, first of all, from a clinical point of view and a scientific point of view, the jury is still out on whether or not we should be using that term addiction. But also, a lot of my work is meant to give people the opportunity to observe and reflect for themselves. So in other words, mindful unplugging says, let go of some of the things that are important to you right now and see what happens. I encourage people to investigate, to take to do this work in a spirit of inquiry. without making any particular assumptions about what they're going to discover. Some people may say, after they've, let's say, decided not to use Facebook or email for a day or a week, oh my God, I see how challenging that is. I see how the urge keeps arising. And if they want to say, oh, well, then this constituted a form of detox, well, that's fine, but I'm not trying to lead them specifically to any particular conclusion.
And it is very interesting, isn't it, to kind of again be aware of our attention and our kind of emotional and physical states once we do mindfully say, right, I'm not going to, for 2 days I'm off a particular social network, or for 2 days, or I don't know, maybe I only have office hours for email. And then kind of observing your physical and emotional state would be really quite profound, I imagine. Is that something that you practice yourself?
Well, I've had I've been offline for a day a week for 20, 25 years. Another notion that we talk about in my course and that I mention in the book is this notion of Sabbath time. We have the traditional notion originally coming out of Judaism that the seventh day is a day of no work. Christians have taken up that notion, and I believe Islam has a related notion as well. I don't, when I work with people, I don't specifically suggest that they take on any kind of religious practice. I mean, I'm teaching in a secular world, and I know it, but there has been an increasing interest just in recent years in the idea of Sabbath time, which is roughly the idea of mindful unplugging. It's the idea that we, as individuals or even as groups, might decide that, let's say, that we might decide that an hour a day that we're not on Facebook or we don't do email or something like that. And so in my teaching, I introduce students both to the traditional notion of Sabbath and then also to this 21st century idea of Sabbath time.
What about focus multitasking? Because that's a really important concept within the book that you introduce. And what is focus multitasking?
Well, to talk about focused multitasking, we should start by talking about what multitasking is and what it is and isn't. I think most people now understand that the science demonstrates that when we are doing what we call multitasking, that we're really serially, rapidly switching our attention between one object of focus and another. That if I'm talking to you and also reading my email, which, by the way, I'm not doing at the moment, but if I were to be doing both of those activities at the same time, which we might call multitasking, what I'm actually needing to do is to switch my attention first to talking with you and then to checking my email and going back and forth. So multitasking is really a kind of rapid serial tasking of switching. And what that makes clear is that when we're multitasking, we are making choices about how to deploy our attention. Am I going to be listening to you at this moment? Am I going to be looking out the window? Am I going to be checking my email or Facebook? Those are choices. Very often, though, I think what happens when we multitask is we are not actually even making conscious choices. That maybe we get a signal from our phone that a new text has come in, and before we even consciously made a choice, we're going to our phone to check on that text. So focused multitasking, which is a practice that I teach my students and also offer in the book, is a practice of increasing one's mindfulness, one's attention, so that one can explicitly, consciously notice the choice points. So you hear the ding on your phone, and you pause at that moment, realizing that you've just gotten a signal telling you that you've got a text. At that moment, you pause and you say, given what my current goals and intentions are at this moment, which, let's say, right at this moment, of course, are to be having this conversation with you, based on what my current intention is, I could say, well, it's not smart for me to go check my phone. So focused multitasking is increasing one's attentional ability enough to notice the choice points and then to make skillful choices.
Gosh, and I noticed that you said that you teach students because you have a very popular course on mindful tech, which teaches students how to deal with things like digital distraction and information overload. Is this something that you found, David, that's gaining more importance amongst young adults and teens? Are people becoming more aware of the impacts of their digital activities on themselves emotionally and physically?
Yes, in my experience, there is a growing awareness among younger people of some of the challenges of using digital devices and apps, and the importance of finding some greater balance. I see that in my course, the course I teach, which is called Information and Contemplation, which I teach at the University of Washington. But also over the past 10 years, I've been speaking with and interviewing undergraduates, college and university students all over the country. And it's been very interesting to notice in these conversations that many students who are born digital, who are millennials born digital and who've grown up with these technologies, it seems to me by the time they come to college and by the time they're in university, there seems to be a growing awareness that some more discernment is needed and maybe some new skills. And so these are this awareness, which I've written about elsewhere, and briefly mentioned in the book Mindful Tech, is something that I think our culture has not yet begun to recognize. We tend to think that those who are born digital, because they grew up with the technologies, don't have any of the questions or concerns or any of the any more balanced sense of what might need to be done to use the technologies well. At least in my experience, that's not true. And it's actually, to me, a very welcome development that I don't know whether it's true in lower grades. I'm sure there's a developmental process, but by the time the students that I'm talking with are in their late teens to early 20s, I think there is really a growing awareness and an interest in developing some of the very skills that I'm talking about.
So I'm wondering now if we can kind of go on to talking about at least some of these skills that you work with and that you've written about. How do you think a busy knowledge worker or digital professional can be internally grounded when they're in an environment of constant digital distraction, and particularly when these digital devices and services, like, they're specifically designed to break up our attention and increase our desire to use them? Like, how can then you be internally grounded?
Well, Lawrence, I like the phrase that you've chosen to be, how can we be internally grounded? I mean, I think that's a really crucial question and concern. It's so easy in today's culture to be distracted, to be rushing around, to be incredibly busy, and therefore not even to be fully present at what we're doing in the moment, whether we're online or we're talking to somebody else or we're driving in our car. And so as a longtime meditator, I've just become aware that one of the challenges in human life, and probably a challenge that has existed throughout human history, is how to be present. How can I be in my body? How can I be attentive to what's going on? And therefore, how can I respond skillfully to whatever's happening in the moment? Now, as you point out, it does seem like some of the ways that our digital tools are designed, or at least the ways we're using them now, only further encourages us to be less present, to be absent, to be distracted. And the question becomes how can we be more present and alive in the moment, assuming that that's something we think is an important thing to do. I have found it to be invaluable to have a long time meditation practice. Today, the mindfulness movement is really booming. One might even say that mindfulness, at least in the United States, has become something of a fad. And we're now beginning to realize that there are some very simple practices that even have scientific support for them that can help us come back into our body and be more attentive. Probably the simplest practice, it's a practice that I've been doing daily for decades now, is a simple breathing practice where you sit or stand or lie down and you just start paying attention to your in-breath and your out-breath, to the actual sensation of breathing as it's arising in your chest or your belly or your nostrils. And then, of course, as your mind gets distracted, which it will, and you start thinking about something else, and you notice that your mind has become distracted, you bring your attention back to the breath again and again. So the basic idea there is that we are training our attention, much as we would train our physical muscles by going to the gym and doing reps, lifting weights or something like that. Because every time we notice we're distracted from the breath and we come back, we are little by little strengthening our attention. We also, by the way, in this very simple practice, we not only notice that we've become distracted, but we take a moment to notice what it was that was distracting us. And over time, we begin to see what are the things that tend to lead us away from awareness, from being present in the moment. There are many, many other kinds of exercises and practices that one can do to train oneself to be more attentive and aware. Some people will take yoga. I'm even suggesting in my work on mindful tech that we can use our digital devices. We can use being on email or Facebook. We can even use multitasking as a way to further train our attention. But I think it's actually very helpful to have a very, very simple practice, one as simple as coming back to the breath again and again as part of one's, if you like, training regimen. Another thing we can do with the breath, by the way, that in addition to maybe sitting for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes in the morning to practice awareness of the breath, is when we're sitting in front of our device, our laptop or our phone or tablet or something like that, and we notice that we're pretty distracted. We can just take 2 or 3 mindful breaths and see if we can relax and come back a little. So even a simple practice like noticing, oh, I'm having trouble focusing, and then taking a few mindful breaths can actually be something that can help us to recover a sense of inner integrity, coherence, and presence.
Are these practices that you've just been speaking of, do these form the crux of the information and contemplation course that you teach students? Because they sound so interesting, and the whole act of training one's attention, it seems that it's critical to things like, for example, focused multitasking, or for mindful unplugging. That act of training one's attention, is that important, would you say?
Yes, that's exactly right. Practices like simple mindful breathing, or another practice that I call the mindful check-in, where you just notice what's happening in your breathing, in your posture, in your emotions, and in the quality of your attention, or other practices like mindful walking. We also do practices like mindful reading and writing. all of these very basic practices form the foundation for for the exercises that I'm asking students and others to do, both in my course and in my book. You're exactly right that we need to be exercising our attention in constructive and healthy ways. And it's typically, I think it's easier to try to do that first without using the technologies directly. So you start by doing mindful breathing, you start by doing mindful walking, you start by doing the mindful check-in, beginning to discover that it is possible to be more attentive, it is possible to strengthen the attention, and that those practices then become the basis for the exercises that are in my book.
David, how would you say that you manage to live mindfully with technology every day?
Well, just to dispel any myths, I'd say that I'm not a poster child for the solution to all these things. I don't want anyone to think for a moment that I have got it all worked out. I'm mindful at times and unmindful at others, like everyone. I get too busy and stressed out and distracted, like everyone else. But what perhaps is a little bit different is that I have been strengthening my attention and my mindfulness for many years. And it's probably quicker and easier for me to come back to a more attentive state. And it's probably quicker and easier for me to notice when I'm out of alignment, just because I have been strengthening my attention for all these many years. But no, it's not as if I have solved all of this. In fact, I'd say another thing that's true of the way I operate every day is I take every day in the spirit of inquiry. So let me say that again. I take every day in the spirit of inquiry and questioning. I'm very interested in what I can learn by observing myself each day, so that even when I get distracted or things aren't working out, I'm trying to learn from that. It's just it makes my day that much richer and more alive, because I know that that whatever else I learned from my own experience, I will be able to incorporate into my teaching or into my writing.
We were talking before just about how technology, how basically humans we've just kind of have this relationship with technology where one is developing. I think even Jeff Bezos was saying this, how we co-evolve with technology. That we make the technology and then the technology makes us, and how we're constantly finding ways to live well with our tech. And I think what's really interesting about your approach in mindful tech is that it's a framework that's loose enough that can almost stand the test of time, if you like. The whole idea of training one's attention in this digital realm, and then that would go some way to insulating us in the future, against the other challenges that we might face from other tech developments. But if we do have the ability to have a strong attention, we can really forcefully bring our attention back, then that should really help us in this increasingly digitized future.
Yes, I think that's right, that that the practices and the awareness that I'm trying to help people to cultivate, that they are just as relevant for whatever future developments arise with our technologies and our relationship to them as anything that we're doing right at the moment. I mean, a good example of that would be the way that virtual reality, VR, seems finally to be maturing in the sense that we are beginning to see devices that will allow us to have a much more immersive, to live in a much more immersive world. And that those technologies have no doubt very powerful and positive uses. And they're also, I think, problematic and dangerous in a variety of ways. And so I think it will be very important with VR or anything else that comes along for us to be aware aware of what's happening in our minds and bodies when we're using them, and then trying to make skillful use of them at times, and also figuring out when not to use them, when to abstain.
Would you say, David, that the issue that one of the main issues that we face with digital distraction, would you say that it's a design problem, or would you say that it's an attention problem, a human attention problem?
Well, it's both a design problem and an attention problem. I mean, they're not fully separable. Um, there's there's a technologist named Tristan Harris, who's been writing and speaking a lot about the problem of design. He's somebody else who is really interested and concerned about, if you like, mindful tech. And the work that he's been doing is to try to argue to designers of apps, designers of technologies and devices, that it's important for designers to take into account the skillful and ethical use of attention. And he's essentially trying to preach to designers that they shouldn't just be designing to hold people's attention because there's more, there's more money in that, but rather they should be trying to help users to deploy their attention in more skillful ways. Excuse me. I don't see myself as a designer these days. There was a time when I was. And so most of my work is not specifically about how do we get designers to design for healthy attention. My work is more about, given that the tools are the way they are, how can we make sure that we are using them in skillfully attentive and ethical ways. But I think that we can't really fully separate design and attention from one another.
David, unfortunately, we've come to the end of the interview, and there's always one question that I ask the guests, and I think I know what you're going to say already. But what would you say is the most important human quality, and how do we cultivate that in the digital age?
I think so. I think I would say that the most important human capacity is our ability to be deeply, meaningfully, empathically connected to one another, to be compassionate human beings who care for one another, who care for the future of humanity and the future of the planet. But to be compassionate and connected to people, to be of real service, we also have to be attentive. We need to be, when we're with other people, we need to be able to reach out to them physically, emotionally, intellectually. And we also need attention directed at ourselves to see the ways in which things inside ourselves are making it hard for us to be connected. So, here we have this amazing digital world that in many ways allows us to connect to one another, as you and I are doing at this very moment, Lawrence. But the challenge we face, which is a challenge we've always faced as human beings, is how do we connect with one another fully, lovingly, compassionately, and ethically? And then the challenge becomes, how do we do that using these tools? And I think that cultivating our attention is an important part of it.
David, where can people find out more about you and your work?
I have two websites that people can look at for more information about my work. One is my University of Washington website, which is dmlevy.ischool.uw.edu. And the other is my non-university, my personal website, which is at davidmlevy.net.
Fantastic. Well, David Levy, thank you so much for coming on to Digital Mindfulness, and thank you for sharing with us your insights from your career and your book. It was a real pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you, Lawrence. I really enjoyed this.